And now, ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello out there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with the return of Binnall of America Audio, Season 1. That's right, we're back. We're back from our mid-season hiatus. Did you miss me? I missed you. This week, we return to action with Melinda Leslie. I've wanted to have Melinda Leslie on the program since I first saw her at the X conference in Washington, D.C. I knew, I was like, I have to interview this woman. Her research is fascinating. And so as Binnall of America Audio progressed and grew, I kept glancing at my list of guests that I wanted. I knew Melinda Leslie was on there, and I finally got a chance to track her down during the mid-season hiatus. And now we're bringing to you a two-part interview with Melinda Leslie talking about covert intelligence involvement in ET abductees. This is just fascinating stuff. For those of you unfamiliar with Melinda Leslie, here's a little bit about her. She has investigated covert intelligence involvement in abductions for 12 years, conducting over 40 interviews of experiencers and researchers of this troubling phenomenon. For many years, Melinda was the director of 2 experiencer support groups and the director of a monthly lecture series for 9 years, presenting nearly 100 speakers. Melinda was associate producer of the 1994 UFO Expo West conferences, has lectured on her area of expertise at numerous conferences, and has been a guest on many radio and television talk shows. And now, of course, she's on Binnall of America Audio. Ladies and gentlemen, the wait is over. Binnall of America Audio returns with Melinda Leslie.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Binnall of America Audio, and I'm excited to bring to you this week Melinda Leslie. Personally, for me, I discovered Melinda Leslie at the X Conference 2 in Washington. It was an awesome presentation, and I was completely blown away. I just could not even imagine, and I hadn't really heard of her yet. And then since then, that was last April, since then, I've come to find out that a lot of people know about Melinda Leslie and her research, and she's very well respected in the field. And when I started putting together Binnall of America Audio, she was on the top of the list. So welcome to the show, Melinda, and thank you for the interview.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Why don't we start off with just your bio here? Like, just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do in the field, how you got into it. It says you've been involved in abductions for 12 years and interviewed over 50 experiencers and researchers of the phenomenon. And I'd say your specialization is covert intelligence involvement in abductions.
That's right.
But tell us a little bit about, like, where you came from and everything and how you got into studying this.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's actually a long story. But I suppose that see if I can give a Reader's Digest condensed version. First off, I have a regular background and work as an office manager and executive assistant and have experienced a variety of fields in the past. So this isn't, my career or anything. Anyone who's involved in the UFO field knows you spend money doing it, you don't make money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unfortunately, but that's the case. And you spend quite a bit of money doing the research. My involvement in this particular subject matter started with, I had an interest my whole life, but since I was in high school, in the paranormal and studying it pretty heavily.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who had these same interests, who I met through an organization group many, many years ago, had turned me on to a radio program in 1989. And at the time, she was into Native American stuff. Oh, gosh, I'm giving the long version. I'm so sure this up.
Don't worry about it.
She was into Native American stuff, and this radio show was talking about Native American things, and all of a sudden switched subject matter. And she told me about it thinking I might have an interest. And the truth is I didn't really have an interest in the UFO subject. My only interest in it was more of a spiritual context of channeled messages, that kind of stuff, if you will. And if anything, I had a little bit of a negative interest in it. But she told me, hey, check out this radio program. It's really interesting. And, I mean, this was like, within a week of it switching subject matter, she instantly told me to check it out. Well, what was happening on this radio program at the time, it was called Billy Goodman's The Happening.
Yeah.
And you may have heard of it. And it was the beginning of the whole Lazar story breaking. It was 89, I want to say it was, I think, July, if I remember correctly. Apparently, starting in about June, Bob Lazar had taken John Lear and I guess George Knapp out to see these craft that were flying, or according to him, being test flown every Wednesday. And they went on this radio program and started to talk about, this was long before Lazar ever did. It started with, I started actually with Bill Cooper, who at the time was friends with John Lear, and then John Lear himself going on at Bill's request and the radio host request. Anyway, so they were first talking about the story. And John had mentioned about going out there and having these sightings. Well, the radio show decided to put a trip together and for people to go out there. On a last-minute fluke, this friend of mine and I, who would take camping trips and often go to Sedona, Arizona, as an example.
Yeah.
We had been overdue. We had not gone camping in like a year, and she said, we've been talking about it. She said, let's go here and join up with these people.
Oh, boy.
And so on a total fluke, we went out there and to what is now known as Area 51 and the Black Mailbox and Mailbox Road and the town of Rachel and et cetera, et cetera. And we had... we didn't necessarily think we're going to have a sightings. We thought we were going out there with a bunch of, like-minded people, and we're going to meditate and, look at the stars. And, we didn't really expect anything to happen, and, of course, it did. And we had sightings, and the radio show had 2 busloads of people out there.
Oh, boy.
And there ended up being, approximately 80 people or so, maybe more. Huh. And the buses had taken off earlier. Well, when we got there, they were first there, but then they left. Anyways, and the remaining people stayed around and agreed that we had the minimum number that we agreed on was about 15 good sightings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and over a period of about 3 hours, from when the bus left to going into about 2 or 3 in the morning. So over a period of about 3 or 4 hours, we had agreed on that. And then we ended up spending the night out there, actually, at the location. And we were so excited by what we saw and totally blown away that we went back 2 weeks later. And we live in Southern California, so going to the middle of Nevada, it's a little bit of a doing. We went back 2 weeks later because we were so excited, and then we went back like a month after that. So basically, in a 2-month period, we had been out there 3 times and had good sightings each time and had joined up with other people out there. And like I said, had sightings each time. Well,
now, hold on. Let me just... Now,
sure.
You never got harassed by security or anything while you went out there?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I've been out there many times since, and I've even taken some groups of people. So, the white Broncos pull up and, that kind of thing.
And they don't chase you off or anything?
No.
Okay.
Where we're going, if you're at the Black Mailbox, you're in a public place. As long as you're not blocking the road, they won't hassle you. I've been out there many times. If anything, they've warned us or checked in us, but they've never made us go. It's never been a problem.
Okay. All right.
And I know people who have even gone down the road and everything, and it's not been a problem. If you go far enough to where the signs are, they will ask you to leave. But usually when they ask you to leave, you do.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. I've not gone to that point where I've been asked to leave. I have been there, but not when there's been security around. Yeah. I've actually been with people who've hiked up into the local hills. A couple of groups over the years kind of been somewhat famous for having had done that, and I was with some of those at different times. And when Glenn Campbell used to live out there, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but anyways, long story short is, been up on the hills and where you can see the base from up on the hill. You're quite a distance away, but you can technically see it. But again, and saw the cameras on the hill and the detection devices. There's all sorts of electronic equipment up there, so they know you're there. But again, never had anything happen. Now, I know other people that have had cameras confiscated, and and some of the stories you've heard, I'm sure. And I know some people, people I know pretty well who have had some pretty interesting stuff along that lines. But long story short is those first 3 times going that. Back in '89, starting in, actually, I think the first time we went was August. I said July, but that was incorrect. I think it was August. So August, September into October. So actually over a 3-month period, we'd been there 3 times. And had these sightings. And something about having these sightings, changed my belief system instantly overnight.
Oh, yeah.
It was... first off, okay, UFOs exist, okay, without a doubt. I'm seeing them. I'm seeing things that defy gravity, defy physics as I knew it, and I was out there with some physicists on one trip, another trip, some astronomers, and, so I knew it wasn't any of that, qualified witnesses. And so so it's like it defied, physics as I knew it. And then also that the government knew about it. Because these things were flying in and out of a known base.
Yeah.
It was clear that this was an active military and scientific installation based upon the signs and, everything about it. I mean, and here they were flying in and out. And as they were flying, and these things would drop out of the sky like a falling leaf, stop on a dime, do right-angle turns, shoot off like a shooting star, and, it was clearly not conventional aircraft. I mean, I've seen all sorts of conventional aircraft out there, too. I've also seen stealth aircraft out there. But in this case, these things were totally defying physics and the way they were flying. I mean, to go like a shooting star, stop, and make right-angle turns, like zip, stop, zip, stop, zip, stop, it's nuts. And very, very unusual. And there were also helicopters in the air at the same time these other things were. So you had these things zipping around, and yet you had discs and orange and white colored glowing objects or lights and small dish shapes kind of stuff. And then you also had helicopters in the air at the same time.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and so something about seeing these, and on the 3rd trip we actually saw a rather large craft. Now, I don't know how big. It was night. We couldn't tell the whole shape, but it had a circle of lights on what appeared to be like the bottom of it. And a couple people had some telescopes, and with the telescopes, you could clearly make out the lights that were on the bottom of this thing, like a circle of individual lights.
Yeah.
And that last time, which was in October, quite a few people were out there and saw this. And apparently with good binoculars and telescopes, you could clearly make out the circle of lights. And so that was very interesting. But these 3 times going out there, first off, changed my belief system, like, as I said, where I said, okay, I know they exist. and the government knows about it. And something about that unlocked something in my memory that in between those trips, not so much after the first one, but after the 2nd and 3rd trip in September, October, I started to have dreams at night where I was remembering childhood experiences, which turned out to be abduction experiences. And I was not dreaming about like things I never knew about before. It was like going back and remembering things I already knew about, like an experience as a child where I had been put down for a nap one afternoon. Everyone had left. One adult stayed at the house with me. This was out in the desert in Southern California. My grandmother had a place, and everyone had left, and this little house she had was in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And late afternoon, put down for a nap, woke up by what I thought were little kids who came to the bedroom window and wanted me to go out and play. Yeah. And I had always had this memory of being woken up and kind of sneaking out with this adult being asleep. Well, suddenly I'm having this again, but this is happening. This is happening at night.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm asleep. So I'm like, why am I dreaming about this? And then another experience where I also remembered something that happened as a child. So suddenly I'm having these dreams about abductions I had had as a child. So in this 3-month period, and it just, like I said, something unlocked in my brain, and I started to have this. Then a couple months after the third time of having a sighting out there, I had a present day abduction, where it wasn't a dream about something that happened to me previously in life, but it was a current, thing.
Oh, man, yeah.
And I had met in these trips out there some researchers. Long story short, as a researcher had introduced me to another abductee, and another researcher had linked me up with a hypnotherapist that he thought I should see.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, so I'm trying to condense this down for you, but over a period of time, I had current time experiences, so we're talking late 80s, so we're going into 1990 here, 1990, had current time experiences, and late 1990 finally got the courage after almost a year to finally go see this hypnotherapist for regression. But I'd already had conscious memory, and I just went to her saying, okay, obviously this isn't happening. Obviously I'm losing my mind, and I'm just happy, and can you refer me to a psycho, she was a psychotherapist. I said, maybe I need a psychiatrist, maybe I need to be prescribed something, have a chemical imbalance, whatever. And I went to her very skeptical of what I was experiencing and remembering. But even some of these, for instance, in 1990, some of these were things that I had, I'd go to, for instance, go to bed, wake up the next morning with a scar I'd never had before.
Yeah.
A healed scar where I'd never had one. Waking up with multiple bruises on my body, as well as the memories of being on a ship and seeing grays and stuff, But I'm like, no explanation for how I had a scar appear. No explanation for how bruises or cuts or needle marks may have appeared. And I was getting these things fairly regularly, and with physical evidence. I had a roommate who had witnessed my being gone when I thought I'd been home. I knew I had about 2.5 hour period of missing time. She went looking for me, basically, went in my room. My light was on in my room, but I wasn't there. I was never aware of being gone. And then later she told me and actually drew a picture of an alien that she said she had seen in the hallway.
Oh, man.
And so I had a roommate witness I was gone during a period of missing time, and witness an alien in the home during my experience, and I had a memory of that experience as well as bruises. So we're talking witness missing time, multiple forms of physical evidence, that kind of thing. So and all these things were happening, and so I went to this therapist, and she said, well, let's see what's going on, and I started to work with her. But like I said, it started with the conscious memory, which led me to go, okay, I need help. I'm not dealing with this as well as I want to.
Yeah.
You do. You really question reality, and I thought, well, obviously this can't be happening. I must be losing my mind. And so that's how my interest in the abduction subject started, as I started self-investigating my own experiences. And then over time, I met other researchers and other abduction experiencers and formed relationships and got involved in a support group kind of thing. And, and as I knew researchers, they were connecting me up with other people. So I started to really become an alien abduction researcher. Besides an experiencer, I started to actually become a researcher. And in 91 had an experience where myself and 2 male friends were driving somewhere over kind of a mountain highway. We'd driven it before and we've driven it since. We knew exactly, give or take half an hour, how long it should take. And we had an experience one night where it took about 2.5 hours longer than it ever should have.
Oh.
So we were missing at least 2 and maybe as much as 3 hours of missing time.
Yeah.
And at least 2, and like I said, as much as 3. And the 3 of us had all sorts of odd physical things, as well as some memory right away, some trauma right away, different things that suggested that something major had happened. And all 3 of us, we kind of, long story short, we'd all kind of become researchers and knowledgeable, and so we knew not to talk to each other about it. We all went and sought out hypnotherapy separate from each other, but with the same hypnotherapist who was working with our case. And that hypnotherapist said that each of us, we learned this later, she didn't tell us this right away, but apparently each of us remembered seeing this guy in military uniform in the background during our experience.
Okay.
And that was in 91. In 93, so I'm jumping ahead, in 93, I had an experience that was fully being abducted by what appeared to be military and covert intelligence types for the sake of being interrogated about my alien experiences. And that happened in 93, and anyway, so subsequently my abduction research kind of took a turn and started to incorporate, again, because I started self-investigating what was going on with this military involvement stuff, and I was having black helicopter harassment, mail tampering, phone harassment, interrupted phone calls, and like I said, black helicopter flyovers that were illegally marked, helicopters flying illegally low, circling continually or hovering over me. I mean, and this kind of stuff started happening, and as I started to self-investigate, I started to ask other researchers and other abductees if they were familiar with this, if they had ever had this happen, and started to find out, yes, that in fact they were familiar with it, both the researchers and the abductees. And then I met Carla Turner along the way, and she said, you must talk about this. And she really encouraged me to go forward with the research. She was, of course, has passed away now, but when she was still alive, we were friends, and she encouraged me to really go forward with this research. And she was so brave and outspoken about it that she was quite a role model for me to be willing to stand up for this subject. And since it's become very important, and I've brought it to the attention of other researchers who are now, because of the work I'm doing with it, taking the subject much more seriously as far as its overall significance, because it has a significance to a whole bunch of areas of understanding in the UFO research arena. Of course, it has a great implication for abductions. I mean, it means not only are abductions very real, but they're a matter of national security, enough that agencies are willing to spend time, energy, and money on their investigation, harassment, surveillance, of the abductees. But that also it has a lot to do with understanding the nature of the cover-up and why that is. It has everything to do with understanding the technology and reverse engineering the technology and the history of crash retrievals and where that technology development has gone. It's linked to all these things, and it's taken a while to kind of bend the ear of the UFO community, but it's starting to happen.
Well, that's good. So it's been sort of a natural progression from just your abduction experiences, and then your own, like you said, your own self-investigation.
Yes.
And now you've sort of carved out this niche that is the Black Ops re-abductions.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I set out to do it. I mean, I was just self-investigating my own alien abductions, then had this other weird stuff happen, and started to ask questions about, well, what was that and why was that, and with the military and intelligence involvement, and then kind of that rolled, I had initially been asked maybe to lecture a few places about my alien experiences, and before I knew it, I was incorporating this stuff, and I was meeting other people who had had these kind of things happen, and I was outspoken, and like I said, was encouraged by Carla to go for it, and And it wasn't like I ever said, I'm going to research this. It just kind of happened as a byproduct of my having experiences.
All right. Now, one thing I kind of noticed because I was watching the DVD of your presentation at the X conference.
Sure.
And the term that's used a lot is MILAB. Now, you didn't use it as much as I would think, because that's sort of your whole area of research.
Mm-hmm.
The actual word MILAB, do you shy away from that? What do you think of that sort of classification?
Yeah, you may know this, but I'll share this for your listeners. That Katarina Wilson, an abductee who's written rather extensively about her own experiences, wrote a book called Alien Jigsaw. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was in that book that she first mentioned the term MILAB. And MILAB was her acronym for military, MIL, and abduction, AB. So it was military abduction. And so she coined the term. And then Helmut Lammer, a researcher from Austria, I'm not sure how he necessarily got onto the subject, but he was researching the subject and wrote a book called MILAB, but I believe gave Katarina, credit for that's where the term was coined. And it just is an acronym for military abduction, but it takes, when you say it takes explaining it. And so it's not that I shy away from using it. It's just sometimes I don't want to have to explain what military abduction, what MILAB means.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll just say military abduction or covert intelligence involvement, because rather than have to say MILAB and then explain it, I just give the explanation without the acronym. And it simplifies things.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing wrong with the term, and it's becoming known in the UFO arena. Because of Katarina and Helmut and
your work,
Carla and my work, and
so with these military abductions, they're occurring. I wanted to know if it's like a recurring process where there's like an abduction. Well, let me start out actually. Let's just get to your basic thesis: is that the government, in the form of black ops, is abducting people after they've been abducted by ETs.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not just the abduction, it's a whole gamut of involvement. It can start with low-grade surveillance of the abductee, progress to maybe some harassment, to being approached, to being monitored, to having their life maybe manipulated or influenced in some way. And then actually progress from there. Those are the first couple levels, and then progress to actually being re-abducted. And again, there's nothing in these people's lives to warrant this kind of interest from the government. These are usually people who are average in every way, and usually hold average jobs, and and have families, and and everything about them is normal in the general context of the word, except for the fact that they've had abductions. This is the cross, gamut of abductees. One thing is it tends to show over time and with research that there tends to be a higher level of I was going to say intelligence, but I won't say that. That's not fair. But a higher level of education amongst abductees in general. But that's a very general term because, of course, abductions now happen all over the world and in every culture. And some of those are third world and poor cultures and stuff. So. But in the U.S., it seems that in general it tends to be. It's not your hick out in the field, even though that's often, unfortunately, portrayed, at least with sightings and stuff. But with abductions, it tends to be kind of a not only general populace, but an educated general populace. And with the MILAB stuff, it tends, to be those abductees who maybe fit certain scenarios. And I've come across some patterns, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But then, like I said, they have the where they're picked up, usually to be interrogated about their alien experience. Quite often, it's to be warned off or warned away from going public or talking about it, kind of a thing. That happens a lot. And then, so that's usually some involvement in the, interrogation slash debriefing, if you will.
Yeah.
And then there's also where they're actually questioning you, and there's a couple of different patterns that come up there, but the two most prominent ones are alien motives and alien technology. Those are the two things that come up the most, where they're interested in what we might know about why are the aliens here, what are they doing, their motives, why are they abducting people, and also, why are they here in general, but also then the technology, what have we seen, have we had hands-on, have we been shown technology, do we have any of it? Do we know how to operate it? These kind of things come up quite a bit. And then there's some other things to a lesser degree, but certainly there's a follow-up of medical procedures. They're often investigating, for instance, if you just had an alien abduction, they're maybe looking to see what did the aliens do to you medically. What is it about you medically or genetically that's of interest to the aliens? And then they're also, they being humans, are also looking at that. And you think, okay, well, this would end with this re-abduction scenario. No, this is about the middle of the list of things that happen. Because then what happens is a deepening monitoring of someone's life. Then what can happen is you can be befriended by an insider who's either trying to steer you away from the subject or is trying to steer you in a particular direction within the subject, like supportive, but in a kind of a manipulative way.
Yeah, these are the minders you talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And controlling and manipulating. And then they can control and manipulate your life, affect your finances, your work, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can be befriended by someone where you actually get in an emotional relationship with them, dating or even marrying someone who is either who may be an insider or someone who has influence in that way.
Wow.
And so there's these deepening, levels of involvement that go even beyond the re-abduction scenario. And some people have quite a lot of this influence happening in their life. And some abductees just have some phone stuff and never have anything else, or just have a helicopter fly over, or maybe mail tampered with, or maybe a combination of that, and don't have anything else. It seems like, if you have some aspect to that, you're more likely to have more, and you're more likely to have more, and, so with each level, it's more likely you're to have the next deepening levels.
Yeah. And
once someone has had the re-abduction scenario and the interrogation, that kind of stuff, it's more likely that they're going to have the other parts. But even with that, I know of some people that have even had the re-abduction, the interrogation, the medical procedures, but haven't had the control and manipulation and the deepening monitoring. It seems to be that control and manipulation happens to be with the people who maybe have the most amount of influence or known in the UFO community or are more likely to go public or who have gone public. Not with the re-abduction stuff and not with the other levels. That can happen to even people who haven't gone public. But it seems to be that the deepening, influencing, manipulating, monitoring kind of stuff happens to be with the more
prominent
public you are.
Okay, so now just to jump back a little bit, when the people get abducted, sometimes they start experiencing this harassment from the government. Like, they don't come, like, before they've even told anybody really that they were abducted. This isn't like they're, the government's waiting outside in the parking lot of, like, Bud Hopkins or something.
Yeah, no. Quite often it's these abductees, like you just said, haven't even told anyone, aren't even sure themselves. A lot of times the abductee, if you ask the abductee, are you an abductee, they may be in denial and flat out say, well, no, or, So, a lot of times, again, the people don't even know themselves that they're an abductee. And if they do, or they have some sense that they're starting to put it together, a a lot of times the abductees don't even necessarily relate it to their experience. What makes them related is sometimes this harassment surveillance stuff seems to happen right after an abduction or subsequent to, in other words, if not the same day, if not within a couple days, within a couple weeks, or within a couple months, but they kind of see, and especially if more than one incident of some kind happened, they then draw a correlation. But I've had some abductees have some low-grade harassment and not necessarily connect it to their abduction. I mean, I've had people approach me after I've lectured and stuff and say, well, I'm an abductee and I've also had this other thing, but I never knew that they were connected.
Oh, yeah.
And they may not be. I mean, there could be other reasons for involvement in your life, but I usually, I would then ask someone, do you have any other reasons for this interest? And, with the exception of maybe some extremely rare accounts, the answer is no. They don't have anything going on. And it does seem to be timed in relationship to their abduction, especially the re-abduction, the being, picked up and interrogated and stuff. That seems to happen, subsequent to an alien abduction within a short period of time after an alien abduction.
So the government knows these people were abducted, before they know. So therefore, the government must know the ETs are.
And at first, I thought, well, this is only happening to people who are going public or have talked about it or are starting to talk about it or talking amongst their family or their friends. And at first, I thought that, but then when I started to meet people where that wasn't the case and hadn't talked to their family or friends or hadn't, and then it started to be like, well, why are they having this happen? And I had to then re-examine that and say, well, okay, how might they know that this person's an abductee? And what I started to realize was, well, maybe maybe there's ways that they know that abductions are happening without them finding out from the abductees. In other words, you go back to the original theories and ideas of was there some kind of agreement, with the government, do they know? In other words, do the aliens provide them some information? Okay, I don't know that, but I won't rule it out.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, well, if that's not the case, what else is there? And then I came across over the years a couple different things that could suggest there's ways that they know. One is, as an example, that they could be monitoring the coming and going of ships, and if there is ships returning to a particular area on a regular basis, then that might suggest that there's abductions in that area, or they actually are monitoring the coming and going from a single location, and that kind of thing. And what I came across was, for instance, that there was a spy satellite that a gentleman by the name of Ron Regehr worked in helping develop, and is specifically developing the information retrieval system for retrieving information from this one particular satellite. And he's gone public, kind of a whistleblower, if you will, talking about how the spy satellite tracks what the government officially calls fast walkers, which are these seemingly intelligently controlled objects coming in from deep space or near space into our atmosphere at a fast rate of speed, and that these aren't meteors or anything else. He was saying that these things are under intelligent control, and that this particular spy satellite, just by chance, was picking these things up from time to time. And he did some real research to correlate these things with any known sightings. And your listeners may be familiar, and you're probably familiar with a famous Iranian pilot incident of an Iranian pilot coming in close contact and chasing down a Iranian fighter pilot chasing down a UFO, and it's a famous sighting and incident, and recorded and known in ufology. Well, he was able to track that the spy satellite tracked the object that the Iranian fighter pilot chased and witnessed, and I think other pilots too, but that this was one of the objects that the DSP spy satellite saw come in from deep space.
Oh man!
And so suddenly you go, wait a second, this is one spy satellite that just happens to be catching these things.
So
and then you kind of scratch your head and you go, well, wait a second. Okay, is it actually got equipment on it designed to track these things?
Yeah.
This is a spy satellite with other purposes, too. Maybe they've put up satellites designed just for tracking these things.
Exactly, yeah.
And how many satellites are up there? And how many satellites are catching them by chance? How many satellites are up there designed to do this? And if this one is picking these things up on a regular basis by chance, it's easy to extrapolate almost mathematically out of the number of satellites up there how many are getting them by chance and how many might actually be up there specifically to do this. And suddenly you go, oh, my God, these guys being the covert ops, the government, the part that is involved with the alien scenario or reverse engineering the technology, doing crash retrievals, that whole cabal, if you will,
the people who
obviously knows what's coming and going a lot better than we've ever given them credit for.
Yeah.
And then you go to the space shuttle missions, STS-78, STS-40. Mm-hmm. There's a couple others I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But, these space shuttle missions that have caught craft coming into our atmosphere and maneuvering in strange ways and focusing in on them. And this, space shuttle footage that before it was scrambled and they used to be able, people used to be able to retrieve it. And some that's also been leaked out, and you just go, okay, the shuttle's catching these things. So suddenly, you just add these two together and you go, I bet they're tracking these things, again, much better than we've ever given them credit for doing. So if they're tracking these things, do they know that any are going repeatedly to a location? Are they looking for that? If they're able to now with satellites find something the size of a quarter from space, or maybe I'm being generous, let's even say the size of a basketball, this is all in the literature,
Yeah.
And seeing great detail down to that size, then tracking a craft coming in to its ultimate location would be easy, kindergarten spy satellite stuff, Yeah. So obviously, it's reasonable to say, okay, they know that these things are coming and going, and other equipment on the ground that may be tracking them. Mm-hmm. And then, if they feel that one is going to a location, they might then be monitoring stuff with that environment. Are there any strange energetic things going on with that environment that maybe they know that there's a residual effect after abductions or after sightings, and maybe they're able to monitor that residual with technology. Are they monitoring the phones to see if somebody's talking about it? Are they monitoring the sound in that environment, whether it's bugged or from parabolic mic or something, to monitor somebody, talking about, So all this together, you start to go, it would actually be pretty easy for them if they're doing any of this at all. It would be easy for them to know who might be abducted. Not that they know who everyone is, but that they might be looking for people that match a list of certain criteria.
Yeah, they could find abductees if they wanted to look for them.
Mm-hmm. And that criteria, again, being, is this an abductee who's had a lot of experiences? Is this someone who's had a varied amount of experiences? In other words, is this abductee someone who might know about alien motives? Do they seem to have some kind of ongoing relationship in a way where maybe this is an abductee who would be a good person for information? And then, is this an abductee who's had any technical experience?
Okay, yep.
Not only in their life, that's separate, but also, is this an abductee who has mentioned anything about seeing technology or experiencing it? They might be looking for that. So and I think that's why some abductees just have low-grade harassment surveillance. I think this is the beginning of them checking you out,
Yeah.
Low-grade harassment surveillance, but never have anything else. Well, guess what? You didn't match their criteria. And probably your low-grade harassment surveillance fell off over a period of time, months or years, And let's say you have that, but you have more of it. Well, then they're looking at you a little deeper, okay? Mm-hmm. And they're not actually going to spend the time and spend the money, per se, to carry out a full operation to re-abduct you unless they really think you have something they want.
Yeah.
But if you have something they want or they think you do, and I tell abductees, and when abductees have met me and said, gosh, I have seen technology and I've had hands-on with the technology and I have a background in military and my father was in the aerospace, all these things that start to match, which I haven't gotten into, but all these things that start to match, the criteria for likeliness, I tell them, I say, fasten your seatbelt. I expect that more will happen to you. I said, hopefully not. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but you match the criteria for people who do have the re-abduction, and so far I haven't really heard back from anyone who's contacted me and said, oh my God, you're right. But I'd have to think about that. I'd almost have to go back and review some notes and some tapes to see if maybe that's right. Now, I have worked with people who have had subsequent stuff after working with me or after talking to me. Absolutely. I mean, I'll hear from them out of the blue, and sometimes I worry when I hear a familiar voice on the phone. I'm like, because I think, oh God, did something happen to them recently? And sometimes they'll start going, I had to call you. I just had something happen.
Oh, no.
Oh God.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I'm there for them to talk to.
Yeah, well, I mean, someone needs to be collecting this information and trying to synthesize it into something, because it's a less spoken of aspect of abductions.
Yeah, it certainly is, and to me, it's such an important aspect, and I'll tell you why. First off, in abductions, in everything ufology, we're looking for that elusive evidence,
Yeah.
and here you have something that provides such strong evidence for not only the reality of alien abduction, but also the possible meaning of alien abduction and the fact that abductions like I said, are so important that on some level they're a matter of national security.
Yeah.
And why is it? What is it about abductions? So I can look at this both ways. I can say, okay, I can understand their interest in what they want to know. We almost have to, if you pardon the pun, reverse engineer from the field to look back and to say, what can we tell based upon their interest? And suddenly some things start to lay out and start to make sense. But, I can look back and go, okay, well, obviously all their interest in the technological aspect is what do I know about how they've developed the technology and how far are they along with that technology and what are their remaining questions? What are the areas that they might be working on with the reverse engineering of the technology based upon what they're asking the abductees?
Exactly, yeah.
And I start to come up with some stuff, and it starts to be like, okay, well, based upon what's happening to the abductees, we know something. You start to be able to know what's going on with the cover-up. Where is it at? What are they doing? What are they working on?
Mm-hmm.
What are they working towards? Based upon their interaction with the abductees.
Yeah,
so getting back to what you said, I think it's an extremely important aspect because it provides us with another way to look at the information, to draw conclusions and draw theories, and because it shows a roadmap for some of these things, and so not only is it really strong evidence for abduction itself, so it's significant within the abduction field because it's such strong supporting evidence. Of course, if abduction, I don't know if you're familiar and your listeners are familiar with the Roper poll, but there was a Roper poll conducted, paid for by the Binnall Foundation, that was headed up by some of the major abduction researchers who tacked on questions within the Roper poll. And it wasn't, are you an abductee? These were questions like, one question was, have you ever had a period of missing time of an hour or more where you or others didn't know where you were? That was one of the questions. Well, they came up with 10 key indicator questions, of which 5 they felt were extremely significant. And if you answered yes to 4 or 5 out of the 5, so in other words, they didn't even count your response unless you answered yes to all 5, basically. Yeah. And answering yes to all 5, what the Roper poll came back with numerically was the representation of the populace was 3,700,000.
Oh, wow.
So if you think 3,700,000 people in the continental U.S., so that's excluding Alaska, Hawaii,
Yeah.
the Virgin Islands, where, the continental U.S. was 3,700,000 people. And the researchers felt, based upon their own numbers of the number of abductees they've worked with and have contacted them and letters they've received, they actually felt that number was conservative.
Oh, wow.
And like I said, only continental U.S., excluding Alaska and Hawaii, and also excluding the rest of the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of researchers have come to realize that, if anything, there seems to be more abduction numbers, like the significance number, or the percentage seems to go up in South American countries, even more than here, And we hear about it here because of our media paying attention to it, but and also the lack of coverage about things like this that happen in other countries that we don't hear about it here. But in other countries, it's prevalent and it's news, and it's even accepted in some, South America, Brazil, this kind of place. So I think there's more numbers that can be done on that over time, but it suggests that certainly these numbers are very high worldwide, and we're obviously looking at a number much bigger than 3,700,000. But even if you go back to 3,700,000, let's even just say, let's cut that by a third and say 1 million. Anything happening of this covert nature, meaning alien abduction, anything happening in a covert nature, such as alien abduction, to over 1 million people in the U.S. alone, would be a matter of interest to national security.
Exactly.
Especially something happening in such a militaristic way as technology being used, as intrusion, as you just take the word itself, abduction. If 1 million people in the country are being abducted by any group of people, they care. And what is the nature of that? Plus, you add that with what we know about crash retrievals, with what we know about insiders coming out and talking about their involvement in the greater understanding of the development of the technology and the alien presence, and you start to go, and the fact that this was all handed off to the military back in the 40s, you start to go, wait a second. If this has become this huge intelligence operation, covert ops, black ops, military, operation in the retrieval of technology and the development of it, and then you go into like what Corso was saying about applying some of that technology out into the mainstream, and was some of it leaked out, and you start to look at all this, and suddenly their interest in abductees, just based upon the number of abductees alone, makes total sense.
Yeah.
And it makes such perfect sense that it wouldn't make sense if it didn't exist. In other words, it makes perfect sense that they have an interest in the abductees just on the numbers alone, also based upon what they might or might not know about the alien presence that they would want to know more about. And so they're going to be interested in the abductees just based upon the numbers, and then they're going to be interested in what they might know based upon what these guys need to know. Or even the possibility. And so I think based upon the possibility, you get into why then it should be happening to more abductees. Well, it's not. It's still a rather small percentage. Yeah, the military involvement. The military involvement aspect is happening to a lot of abductees, but not all of them.
Yeah.
By any means. I mean, not enough work has been done on it to say the numbers. I can't say 1 in 20, or 2 in 20, or 1 in 100. I can't say that. But I can say that it's a lot, and it's increasing. But you would also think, based upon what they might be looking for and what they might be developing, that it would make sense over the last 50 years, and certainly with that over the last 20 years, that it might be increasing.
Yeah.
And so that's what you have. And as I said, so therefore it's like, okay, it makes sense that it's happening. if it should be happening, if there should be this national security interest, if there should be this black ops involvement, is there evidence for that? And yes, there is, based upon what's happening to people, the witnesses to it, the tampering that, people are photographing their helicopter harassment and videotaping it, and there's witnesses to the harassment surveillance. There's evidence often left behind, even in these scenarios. I mean, it seems that when it comes to human doing these things, as much evidence is left behind or is given by the aliens seem to be better at being covert, be better at covering their tracks. I mean, even they don't completely, but the humans, they're sloppy.
Yeah, they make
mistakes. Stuff happens, So I think there's not only is there evidence for this happening, but that this happening is such evidence again, such evidence for the reality of alien abductions. And, as I also said, tells us so much about what do they know, when did they know it, where are they at with it, how, meaning those involved in covering this up, and what what are they developing, and why are they doing it, and therefore, I think this military involvement in abduction scenario becomes more than just being important to the abduction community. I think it's important to the entire UFO community, and in fact, any group of people looking at the angle of larger reasons why government does stuff. I say conspiracy angle, but I mean more than that, really. I think this is important to understand because I think it relates on so many levels. And it's taken me years to come to the point where I can say that as strongly as I do,
Now, do you find with the people that you talk to, these MILABs, I wrote MILABs in the notes. So
sure, that's fine.
It's easier for me. Do you find that the MILABs are like, is there a recurring pattern here? Let me rephrase it like this. Someone gets abducted, then they have the harassment and the military experience. Does another abduction follow, or does the military experience usually put a stop to the abductions?
No, the military experience does not put a stop to the abductions. But I'm saying this very loosely. Like, again, this isn't one of those areas where I've looked at it specifically enough to say definitively.
Well, it's a new area.
But I can kind of say loosely that it seems that the alien abductions slow down and lessen when someone starts having a lot of the military stuff. And I've kind of just had a theory, and again, I say this loosely. I can't base this upon numbers. This is just my feeling of where this is going, is that when you start to have the military experiences, to the aliens, you're like tainted by it. You become like damaged goods, I think it makes sense if what they're trying to do is covert and they're trying to not have the government or the military or those involved know fully what they're doing, and you're an abductee who's having a lot of experiences with them, and then you have the military stuff, and then if the aliens know that, and I think that's clear that the aliens probably know when you've got this going on, that suddenly, it's like, if they don't want to be found out, this sounds kind of creepy, but, if they don't want to be found out, then obviously the fact that they know that the military is going to be getting more information from you, they're like, well, we're going to stop providing any more information to this person because then at this point we know they're a spy, basically, and what happens in the re-abduction scenario, it's funny that I got into the spy thing, but that's one of the things that happens in the re-abduction scenario is often the abductees given post-hypnotic suggestions to retain certain kind of information should they be picked up again. And what happens is they have another abduction experience, and then boom, you have another military experience. So what happens to the people who've had both? It seems like you have a lot of the alien, then you have alien and military, and then you've got both going on. And at some point, the alien ones start subsiding as the military ones increase, and all of a sudden you don't have either going on. And, and I think it's because you're a risk to the aliens, and yet you're not useful now to the military guys because you're not providing them the information they want.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy, but I've seen this happen in a couple of scenarios. Again, it's one of those things is like as the research goes forward, I can look at more strongly.
Yeah.
For instance, the research from time to time takes different directions as different things come up and are more prevalent. And one thing, for instance, that's come up in the past but is prevalent for me now and I'm kind of looking at right now is that in the re-abductions that the people have where they have the military experiences is some of these abductees get used in military procedures, like in training procedures, in war game scenarios, this kind of thing.
Really?
And it was always kind of there, and I didn't know really what to make of it. And recently, because of two recent cases where this has come up more prevalently, I'm now wanting to look at that more and say, again, if it's understanding what do the covert guys know and how long have they known it, I can kind of say, okay, based upon what kind of procedures these people are being used in, do we know, can we then kind of know what their next move is by the cover-up guys, and more, it's also a deepening understanding of why the military guys are interested in those abductees. What is it about those abductees that would make the military guys want to involve them in some kind of war game scenario or testing or, what and why those particular abductees and not some other abductees? Some abductees it seems to be more medical, and some it seems to be more technical, and some it seems to be, and I'm not sure why that is, but it's come up, and also, to me it's like, well, obviously there's some kind of preparation by the covert ops guys, and what are they preparing for? And that's a concern. It's like, are they planning to go to war? Is it just Cold War? Is it war? Is it just about the technology development? If it is about the technology development, is it because they plan on using it? And they're going to use it against who and why,
Exactly.
And so I get down to, and so when they're involving the abductees, now one thing I can say is the involvement of the abductees is not, and this, I can say this, I don't know that I can say this definitively, but I have a strong sense based upon how it's coming up in the cases I'm working with, that it's not about them using the abductee. It's not like they're creating posted not spies of the abductees that they're going to use in some military way, or they're going to, the abductees are being trained for some military operation. No. No. It's more like they're developing training procedures, and they're trying to duplicate the way the abductees may process information or the way they react, not because they plan on using the abductee, but because they're developing a procedure that they're going to train military guys.
So like they're reverse engineering via the abductees.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to look at it. Hey, I'm gonna borrow that.
Go for it.
That's perfect the way you said that, because that's exactly what it is. And so it doesn't appear that the abductees are going to be used in some way. I think the abductees are way too much of a risk to them. But how we might be able to do something, how we might be able to react, and this gets into a strange area where a lot of what the abductees do falls into the paranormal qualities. And this paranormal aspect, the telepathy, mind control, mind reading, remote viewing, telekinesis, moving matter with your mind, affecting matter, that kind of stuff seems to be the procedures that they're involving the abductees in, that they're trying to duplicate and then train military guys how to do.
Yeah. Now,
because obviously, and again, it's kind of weird because it gets at, are they preparing for a possible scenario? Or are they preparing for a scenario they know is coming? And that I'm uncomfortable with all those things, but being uncomfortable doesn't mean I shouldn't look at it if it's coming up in my research. I should say, okay, this is coming up, and I need to see if I can, get anything that's consistent amongst it. And right now I'm just getting sporadic accounts kind of here and there, but it's kind of where, it's my latest area of interest in my research.
Now,
like I said, changes from time to time. So
exactly.
next year I'm going to be on to something else.
Well, it's a new sort of area. It's a new field of research, really, in the last 10 years or so, would you say? So I can see how it's evolving as you find out more information about it.
Oh, yeah, it has constantly evolved. I mean, since I really started to kind of look into it in 93, 94, since then, it is constantly evolved. And at different times, I had, different areas of it that I was, most interested in.
Yeah.
And it's all based upon the cases I get, people who refer to me, and what's happening to them, and I just follow the evidence,
Yeah.
And so when I get a bunch of cases that are bringing up one particular thing, I follow that, and so it's constantly evolving and moving forward.
And now in some of your cases, this one kind of stood out to me, and I wanted to ask you about it, was you said there are instances where people talk about grays and humans working together.
Oh, yes.
Can you just speak to that a little bit? Because obviously that's fascinating in and of itself.
Well, it's a complicated area, but absolutely, and has come up repeatedly. Sometimes to lesser degrees, sometimes to greater degrees, and not just grays, other types of alien beings too, although predominantly grays. But now, it doesn't mean everyone who has the re-abduction. Okay, so first off, not everyone has the re-abduction.
Yeah.
But, let's say you do have that aspect of the scenario. In the re-abduction, it's usually about an interrogation. Sometimes there's medical. And then, of course, like I said, there's this role-playing stuff and this war game stuff and technology operations, different things. And those things are rare. But in there, also very rare, is the abductee, for instance, being taken to an underground military installation, apparently military. I mean, there's guys in military uniforms, so that we assume, therefore, it's military because military uniforms are seen.
Yeah.
It could be a science installation. We'll rule that out, that kind of thing. And they predominantly are with humans in a human environment, but we'll see the presence of what appears to be an alien, or they'll interact with an alien, or an alien will be brought in to perform a certain procedure on the abductee, even though the majority of the experience was at the hands of humans. And then there's also like myself and two friends who had that experience where it was predominantly an alien experience in every way. There just happened to be a guy in military uniform on board the ship, like he was monitoring what was happening. Now that to me is even weirder.
Yeah.
It's like, how out of place was that? And the three of us saw this independent of each other and didn't even talk to each other about it. It came out in our regressions, and it just, to all three of us, seemed completely out of place.
Yeah.
That there'd be this person in uniform. Not like he was another abductee. That might make sense because abductees do sometimes see other abductees. But in this case, he seemed to be there in some official capacity, like he was watching or monitoring. Yet it was a gray ship with grays. What's with that? And so you have that odd scenario too. But mostly what people would report, or an abductee report who's had the re-abduction, is to say, I was in this underground military base. They had me in this rooms. I walked down this hallway. It was normal lighting. There were desks and chairs and, whatever. And door handles and, all this stuff that make them go, well, this is completely human,
Yeah.
And then they might be on a table with apparently human doctors, but then all of a sudden in walks this one alien.
Yeah.
And it does something to them, or looks at them, or whatever, or is involved, or does the mind thing that aliens are infamous for doing in abductions, and then leaves, and then yet the rest is human. It's like, well, wait a second. That seems odd. Or they have an interrogation, and in the midst of their interrogation, in the background, they might see two guards and an alien walk by. Now, I think most of these scenarios, this is what's come up in the research, and this is what the abductees generally report to me, is that this is staged.
Oh,
that
really?
they're being shown the alien on purpose it's multi-level. It could be to cause confusion in them. It could be to cause fear. It could be to get them to open up more, to kind of like, we know more about this kind of thing, so you can go ahead and tell us more because we know more.
Yeah, like the aliens are here, so don't worry, you're not going to disobey them or something.
Yeah. So, and also sometimes just to confuse the abductee, sometimes to cause fear in the abductee. They seem to be like, if they see an alien present with the military, it seems to be deliberate. That's not like by mistake. It's like, oh, quick, get the alien out of here. She saw her. The guy on the table saw the alien. No, not like that. It seems to be staged and deliberate. But except for in a few scenarios where people see multiple aliens with the military and multiple interacting, and then it seems to be like, we don't care that you see this. But again, I think it's like you just said, like the aliens are here. We know, like it's a confirmation kind of thing, where they're like letting you in on it. And I think if you're an abductee who's being let in on that part where you're being shown the presence of aliens interacting with them, it's to cause you to open up. It's like they think this will either increase your memory or increase your willingness to talk about it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That seems to be there. And then in some weird scenarios, now get this is another area that when this first started to come up in my abductions was extreme, not me, but it's not happened in my own experience, but with cases and working with other people.
Yeah.
An extremely uncomfortable area is, and I don't want anyone to jump to any conclusions with this because I've had to sort this out quite a bit, is sometimes they will bring in a person in an alien costume in the midst of what apparently is a completely human experience. Okay, but there'll be something there that is without a doubt and obvious to the abductee to be a fake alien.
Yeah.
Usually when they're reporting it to me, they're like, they did the weirdest thing. This guy put on a mask. And it's clear to the abductee because usually there's drugs induced in conjunction with this.
Yeah.
And all the abductees that have reported this to me have said that it caused them to be confused as to the nature of that particular experience. Like, okay, when we induce the drugs to get you to forget that this has happened, okay, when they start the mind control procedures for you to say, okay, this has not been a human experience or that this is not happy. Because the human guys definitely tried. Even though, like I said earlier, I was joking about them being sloppy, they absolutely try to cover their tracks.
Yeah.
And they use a lot of hypnosis, drugs, and mind control procedures in the process to do that. And often in the inducement of the commands that you're not going to remember this and the inducement of drugs, this kind of stuff, is sometimes when this person in an alien costume thing will be introduced. And it is either to influence your memory where you're then going to see that and they try to maybe get you to focus on that so you're going to think it's an alien experience. In the event, they don't want you to remember at all, but if you do remember, you might think it's an alien experience. Or just to cause confusion and add to the bizarreness, so if you do remember it, you're just going to discount it.
Yeah.
Because the few abductees that have reported this to me kind of said they kind of discounted it initially. And when they brought it up, it's like the last thing they're going to bring up with me. They're bringing up other stuff. They're talking to me, and they hem and haw and go, this is really weird. What do you think of this? And the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh God, how uncomfortable. Because part of me didn't want to say this is all human. There are no aliens, which some people listening might say, well, see, there are no alien abductions, all human stuff. But that actually doesn't apply when you really closely look at all the evidence for both. The alien experiences to the abductee are so alien in every way. They're alien environments, alien equipment, alien procedures. The air is self-luminous. There isn't a light source. As an example, everything is said with telepathy. If there are doors, there aren't handles. Doors, but there's usually not doors. The floor is usually odd. It's ceilings are, I mean, again, the environments are alien. The procedures are alien. The aliens act in a weird way. Half of what they do doesn't make sense. What they do is awfully so confusing. There seems to be a pressure feeling difference in the room, an electrical quality, all these things. In the human experiences, what the abductees report to me is the reason they know it's human is because everything about it is human. The people talk. They're wearing uniforms. They're wearing lab coats and doctor's outfits. It's a human environment.
Two different worlds.
Two different worlds, down to the way it feels. Not just how it looks, but how it feels, how it sounds, everything. And so the abductees are usually very clear when it's one versus the other, which is why when you get this scenario of a person in an alien costume, it seems so out of place.
Yeah.
And it becomes apparent to the abductee. It's like, and maybe initially they discounted it because it was just this other weird layer that made them just go, I can't even deal with this.
Yeah.
But often I've had abductees have this epiphany even while telling me their experiences and go, I know that was a person in a costume. That didn't make sense,
Yeah.
And then sometimes I've had some abductees report that they thought maybe it was someone in a costume, but maybe they weren't certain, and maybe there was actually an alien present. And, so I don't ever try to tell the abductee, well, it was a person costume, or it was an alien, or it was military, or it was an alien experience. I usually let the abductee tell me what they think it is.
Yeah.
And if they say, have you ever heard anything like this? And if I can report back a scenario or two that sounds just like what they're saying, suddenly then they're like, oh, okay, and then they go on to the next thing. And a lot of abductees start to have, almost spontaneous recall while talking about their experiences when it becomes okay to talk to someone where they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, even that's what makes the regression successful. It's not, hypnosis is just someone giving you permission for you to remember.
Yeah.
They're giving you permission and getting you in a relaxed state where you give yourself permission to remember, an experience. And, anyways, I don't want to get into this whole thing about hypnosis. Because truth is, when it comes to abductions, this is often not talked about, when it comes to abductions, most of it is remembered consciously.
Yeah.
Most experiences, when you go to get regression based upon your conscious memories, where you have this piece and this piece and this piece, and you're trying to make it make sense.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's mostly unconscious memory. And with these military experiences, I would say I won't say all 100% conscious memory, but I will say such a high percentage of conscious memory.
Yeah.
That the abductee has remembered this consciously, and that's where I get down to the humans, even with the administering of drugs and procedures and stuff. It's amazing given that the abductee remembers anything at all. Yet not only do the abductees remember, but they usually remember on their own. Often it surfaces initially in the form of a dream or something, but once they start to remember, then it's like their full memory of the experience comes back. So the ability of these military guys to cover up what they're doing and to cause an abductee to forget isn't really good. I mean, the abductee has questions and stuff, but usually, like I said, there's just a lot of conscious memory there.
Now, some of these, this sort of just popped into my head, but some of these people that get drugged, I remember in your notes it said that they still sort of feel the effects the next day a little bit. Has anyone ever gotten like a blood test or anything afterwards?
Yes.
And what kind of results do you get from those?
One abductee, as an example, comes to mind right away. It wasn't immediately afterwards because she didn't think to get it immediately, but over a period of time, I think it was just within a couple months of a major military experience where she had been given a bunch of drugs. Someone suggested to her that she could have that tested via her hair.
Yeah.
And they did test, and they came up, apparently were able to determine what kind of hallucinogenic drugs had been given to her, and other drugs. I can't remember the names of them or anything, but it was known stuff. And they were able to determine that one of the drugs is only manufactured in one NSA lab.
Oh, really?
It's so rare. But someone, and again, I don't know the full thing here, but they were able to research that they were able to determine, maybe it is made in other places, but that it is made in this one NSA lab, and it is extremely rare.
So it's a pretty strong piece of evidence, then.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so she has and many abductees, or many of the abductees who report the military stuff, say one of the things that they know right away, and they have conscious memory right away, is the next day is how they feel. I mean, and they start to realize that there's this, pattern to the way they feel.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that tells them that they just had a military experience and not an alien experience, is because they'll be completely wiped out the next day and spend the day in bed, and that doesn't happen after the alien experiences. I mean, it does, but it's rare. And most abductees know the symptoms. If they've had multiple alien experiences, they know the symptoms before and after. And then when you start to notice that you have different symptoms after the military experiences, and often it's because, there's a lot of physicality. I was going to say physical abuse, but I'll just say physicality that leaves the person extremely exhausted because of the physicality of the military experiences, and often abuse. So sometimes there's more bruising and this kind of thing after the military experiences, even more than the aliens. There's usually not a lot of it after the aliens. There is some bruising, but there's usually more after the military experience, especially if the person resists. When you're resisting the humans, it's just as if you got in a fight during the day and resisted in a fight situation, and you're going to have those same kind of injuries.
Yeah.
And so people have these kinds of injuries, and then they also have the effects of being drugged. And this can cause all sorts of things, everything from feeling hungover, typical hangover kind of feelings the next day, to more bizarre and more difficult things to deal with, feeling really sick.
Yeah.
And this is reported quite often after the military experiences.
And also from your notes here, it says consistently the MILABs were worse than the ET abductions. That's what the people say. Now, you wouldn't.
As far as frightening experiences, in fact, I just had. Long story short, because I don't need to get into depth, although it's someone who's significant, who works with a number of abductees and is very qualified to know these things, who is also herself an abductee, just told me recently that she started to come to the conclusion, now this is an extreme, but she started to come to the conclusion whenever she has a really negative alien experience, that it's actually a military experience.
Oh, really?
Now that's a far reach, because the truth is there are a lot of people who are very traumatized by their alien experiences, and that's usually what causes one to start self-investigating or needing help initially, is because they're traumatized by their experience. Now, granted, not everyone is traumatized by their alien experiences, and usually after a period of time that trauma goes away and there starts to be some kind of level of acceptance or interaction. But initially, it's usually traumatic.
Yeah.
On varying levels, but, usually a fear-based trauma. In the military experiences, though, everyone I know who's had lots of both kinds of experiences, or not even lots of both, but has had alien and then military, have all across the board. I mean, I think I've heard this from absolutely everybody. Everyone has told me that their military experiences are worse.
Yeah.
Worse meaning more physical, more difficult, more frightening, more confusing.
Oh, really?
More traumatic. I mean, the military guys, it seems that the part of the mind control aspect of getting the abductee to forget what's happened to them usually or quite often involves a level of trauma. And the aliens tend to bring you back in one piece. And yes, you're often traumatized by the fear of the experience, but it's usually not because the aliens try to induce trauma.
Yeah.
The military guys deliberately try to induce trauma. induce a state of fear, a state of panic, physical abuse, this kind of thing, often associated or in correlation, with the drug, in connection to drugging you. But everyone has said, people say, look, I've had abductees repeatedly say, look, I'm not wild about my own experiences. I wish they hadn't happened. But the military guys are a lot worse. They treat you worse. They're meaner. They're meaner. They're rougher. I've had this said to me. I've never had anyone say, my alien experiences were as bad as my military.
Yeah.
Or my alien experiences were worse than my military.
Yeah.
Every single person that's related these experiences to me thus far, thus far, everyone has said, and I've never had to ask them. It's come up every time. My military experiences were worse. And, it's just, these, pardon my language, but these guys are assholes.
Yeah. Well, they're just not as good as the ETs, I guess, in abduction.
Well, the ETs aren't always great, but
yeah, but they
I don't know. They're not as rough, and it's not as scary. And the other thing is too, a lot of times there's more trauma just solely based upon the fact that there's the shock of other humans doing this to you.
Yeah.
First thought, that they're doing this to me, it's immoral, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional. There's more rage in the abductee.
Exactly, yeah.
The abductee doesn't have that much rage. Sometimes they have rage against the aliens. I shouldn't say they don't, but quite often they don't have rage against the aliens, but they do have rage against the military. With the military, it's more like, how dare they? It's like we can almost say the aliens are aliens. They don't know better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's a lot of abductees come to terms with their experience by saying, these guys don't know better. They're clumsy. They don't know, But with the military, it's like, how dare they? They know what they're doing is wrong. They know it's unconstitutional. They know it's illegal. They know they're doing something immoral.
Yeah.
They know when they're hurting you that it's hurting you and that they're hurting you on purpose. Mm-hmm. They know that. And they're evil. What can I say? They're just evil. Yeah. And that's what the abductees report.
That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. I want to thank Melinda Leslie for sitting down and talking to us for so long. She'll be back next week with Binnall of America Audio as we delve into in-depth discussion on the minders, these folks that sort of glom on to various people in the abductee world. Her co-author's frightening story. This story will freak you out. And that's going to be next week. And what other researchers have to say about Melinda Leslie's work. She discusses various aspects of their cases and stuff like that. You're going to like that. And tons more. And that's all next week on Binnall of America Audio. And you can find that at binnallofamerica.com. I want to thank Leslie and Chiron of binnallofamerica.com for your help and support with the audio series. And, of course, I want to thank all you great listeners out there. I hope the extended break wasn't too long and you've found us again and you're back into the fold. I want to remind you all that you should check out binnallofamerica.com for daily updates of various esoteric news, commentary, humor. It's all there at binnallofamerica.com. In light of the return of Binnall of America Audio, we've actually redesigned the binnallofamerica.com mothership site. I hope you check it out, and you can find that at www.binnallofamerica.com. Thanks to all the great websites out there that have been linking up to us as well, theanomalist.com and dailygrail.com. That is much appreciated. And again, to all the great listeners out there who find us somehow, tell their friends, post it in their blog, attach a link in an email to somebody important. All you people out there who are doing the legwork for us, I appreciate it. Much thanks. So until you hear from me again next week, this is Tim Binnall, signing off.